During the 19th century, societies in the Western world were undergoing dramatic changes. Monarchies were crumbling. The church was losing moral authority. And science was emerging as a powerful tool for progress. The old rules concerning power and wealth were being shattered. Searching for a way to understand what was happening in society, the enlightened minds of the period suggested that the scientific method should be applied to the study of society. Rigorous observation and analysis would determine how people could best live together and prosper. The word sociology was coined by French philosopher Auguste Comte in the early 1800s. The foundation for modern sociology was built on the published works of Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, and Max Weber. Although he's best known as the man whose work inspired communist revolutionaries, Karl Marx's writings are considered pioneering sociological studies of economic change.
Karl Marx was concerned whether the Industrial Revolution would impoverish the working class and whether the attainment of bourgeois democracy would serve the needs of workers and liberate them from the problems which they experienced.
Scholarly analysis of these issues ultimately led to Marx's greatest work, Capital. Written while Marx lived in abject poverty in London, Capital chronicled the rise of capitalism and its impact on the masses. In France, Emil Durkheim took a more hopeful view of the Industrial Revolution. But he also struggled to comprehend its impact on society.
Essentially, throughout the late 19th century, Durkheim and others really wrestled with this issue of modernization. What was going on in the Western world when industry started to develop, the workplace became an important place for everyday life. The notion that people didn't necessarily work for themselves, began to work for other people in hourly wage earning capacities.
Durkheim and his associates believed that the scientific study of events unfolding around them would provide a blueprint for positive social change. Durkheim eventually founded scientific sociology in France. His books, such as The Division of Labor in Society, Rules of the Sociological Method, and Suicide, greatly influenced the development of sociology. One of the changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution was the rise of bureaucracies. The German sociologist Max Weber was among the first to understand the overwhelming importance of bureaucratic forms of social organization. He also pointed out their increasing dominance in the lives of individuals. Like Durkheim, Weber believed that the scientific method must be used in sociological research.
Weber argued that essentially a scientific, meaning a suspending of personal interests, goals, values, a scientific approach to the understanding of social life, would enable people to come to terms better with the experiences they were confronting.
While its roots were European, the discipline of sociology developed most rapidly in North America during the first half of the 20th century. Waves of immigrants were dramatically changing America's urban centers. There was a great need for detailed, objective information about social conditions. Many important social surveys were conducted around the turn of the century. Among them was W.E.B. Du Bois' survey of African Americans in Philadelphia, which documented the impact of discrimination on economic advancement. Living in a time of intense racism and social injustice, both of which he personally experienced, Du Bois was an academic sociologist who was passionately committed to social reform.
He may be viewed on the surface level as a very powerful figure in the study of race and racial phenomena. More fundamentally, he was one of the first people that said we must actually go out into the field, collect data, collect facts, collect statistics. His project, at least within the United States, was to look at what was the classic oppressed group in the sort of transformation to an industrial society.
Although there were few women in academic settings during this time period, they had a tremendous impact on the development of sociology. In 1889, social activist Jane Addams founded Hull House to serve a poor immigrant neighborhood in Chicago. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931 for her work in promoting women's suffrage, labor unions, and world peace. Ida Wells Barnett was a crusading journalist who spoke out against segregation and lynching. In 1895, she published the first scholarly analysis of lynching and its impact on the African American community.
Ida Wells Barnett looked at issues of lynching and tried to draw some understanding through a statistical account of when, where, and how lynchings occurred in the South. It became very clear that economic success was tied to the rise and fall of lynching. Her own work in uncovering this finding led others to be able to see that sociology had a purpose and could provide a set of explanations that other fields of inquiry could not.
Edward Franklin Frazier, a protege of W.E.B. Du Bois, was a research professor of sociology. His book, The Negro Family in the United States, published in 1939, was an analysis of the history of the African American family.
Franklin Frazier talked mainly about the way in which the American black family and later on the American black middle class had this role in the society of, on the one hand, he called it the imaging, the way in which the American family as a dominant group played a role in how blacks thought about themselves. And later on, his work on the American black middle class became the classic work on that topic.
By the late 1920s, two distinct approaches to the study of society had evolved at American universities. While the major East Coast universities leaned toward macro-level analysis, which focused on social structure and change, the Chicago School focused on the relationship between the individual and society. At the University of Chicago, sociologists Robert Park and Ernest Burgess developed the approach known as human ecology.
Human ecology, as a subfield of the sociological enterprise, really began in the early part of the 20th century. It was an attempt to make sociology a science of social life. The basic idea was that the city could be looked at as a social laboratory that contained different people, different social groups, different ethnic groups, competing for stability, for a chance to progress and endure in an urban context.
Oscar Lewis was one of the first social scientists to study some of these ethnic groups.
Oscar Lewis was a phenomenal figure in his studies of Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans in the United States. Himself not a Latino, but someone who really kind of engineered what has become a middle and late 20th century discussion on culture by looking at Puerto Ricans in New York City, Mexican Americans in the Southwest, Mexicans in Mexico, and making some fundamental arguments about the culture of poverty.
As the world continues to go through rapid, dramatic changes, can sociology keep up with these changes? What is the global perspective on present-day sociology?
Sociology plays, I think, an increasingly important role around the world. Sociologists all over the world are contributing to the development of their societies. You have very, very active sociological traditions in India and Southeast Asia, in Africa and Latin America, and much of the globalization of the world's economy and its non-governmental organizations is involving sociologists.
What began as a method for helping 19th century Europeans understand the impact of social and industrial revolutions on their lives, sociology has evolved into a scientific discipline embraced by cultures the world over.